So the day before, we discussed about Plato and Hegel, and we also discussed that there are many ways that you can introduce a question, whether it is by way of definition or by way of the central question with respect to the topic that has been asked. For example, question is on causation, question is on personal identity, question is on problem of induction. So there are certain central questions through which you can raise the debate and start your question, your answer. Then the other way would be to define it. For example, how Spinoza would define his substance, which has in itself, through itself, metaphysically independent, epistemologically independent. Leibniz, how would he define his? And also we discuss about how there can be a standard introduction of a theory. For example, theory of forms is an answer to fundamental question of metaphysics as to what is the ultimate reality. According to Plato, ideas are the ultimate reality, and the aim of this theory is to explain the world. Or according to Leibniz, the basic question is what is the ultimate reality. Leibniz says monads are ultimate reality, and the aim is to provide a dynamic and pluralistic explanation through some spiritual entities. Okay, so this is there, and now we are to the G.E. Moore वाला पार्ट, G.E. Moore to Strawson. ये कंटेम्प्रेरी का पार्ट है. कंटेम्प्रेरी वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी में सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत ये आती है कि कोई स्टैंडर्ड सोर्स है नहीं इसका. तो क्या होता है कि बच्चे बहुत ही कई बार तो गलत भी लिख जाते हैं. प्लेटो टू हीगल तक ऐसा है कि देर इज़ अ स्टैंडर्ड सोर्स, जैसे वाई मसीह है, फ्रैंक तिली है, या फिर कोई और किताब आपने पढ़ी. कोचिंग के नोट्स भी सफाइस करते हैं कई हद तक, बट कंटेम्प्रेरी के अंदर इश्यूज़ आते हैं. इन इश्यूज़ को रिजॉल्व करने के लिए व्हाट यू कैन डू इज़, सबसे पहले तो कोर समझ गए उसका कि फिलोसफर ने क्या बोला. जी मूर तक तो आई डोंट थिंक ज़्यादा लोगों को दिक्कत आती होगी. प्रॉब्लम आती है रसल या अर्ली विटगेंस्टीन के अंदर, और कुछ लोगों को स्ट्रॉसन वगैरह में प्रॉब्लम आती है. बाकी तो इन जनरल लिख देते हैं, समझ जाते हैं. तो जब जी मूर की बात करते हैं हम, तो यहाँ पे दो चीज़ें हैं: डिफेंस ऑफ कॉमन सेंस एंड रेफ्यूटेशन ऑफ आइडियलिज्म. Defense of common sense is actually a paper that he published, and refutation of idealism also is a paper that he published in the journal Mind in 1903. Refutation of idealism, you know what he's doing. He's trying to attack the subjective idealism, and he's saying that if I'm able to demolish this subjective idealism by way of essayist percipi, the attack on essayist percipi, I will be able to at least tilt the body of idealism, even if not demolish it altogether. So let's imagine idealism as some giant building, and one of the strong pillar of the giant building is essayist percipi, subjective idealism of Berkeley. If Moore is able to destroy it, then definitely he would tilt that foundation of that strong building of idealism. So he was trying to do this. He was trying to show that how idealists are confused between the awareness of object and object. For example, the blue exists versus consciousness of blue exists. So consciousness of blue exists because there is something which is blue outside of the consciousness. So there is a content of consciousness as well, and the act of consciousness. But the idealist, since they are always aware of the content of consciousness as a mental act in their mind, so they confuse the awareness of a thing and a thing. Since the idealist perceive an object, then object is always present before them. Whenever I see blue, blue is always there in my consciousness. So as an idealist, if you start thinking this, then it seems that as the awareness of an object is mental, the object is also mental. Since blue is mentally being cognized, so we feel that blue exists only inside. But Moore says it is not the case. Awareness of an object contains two elements: the awareness, which is a mental act, and the object, which is physical. But object contains only one element, which is physical. So it is wrong on the part of the idealist to identify these two as similar. Okay, so this is what is the crux. Crux is that since as an idealist I always cognize the content of my mind, so I believe as if the content of mind alone is real. But to have some content in the mind, there has to be something which is outside of the mind. So blue exists independently. This was also a question asked by UPSC. Secondly, they say, Moore says, in refutation of idealism, that the entire building, the giant structure of idealism stands on various pillars. And the subjective idealism of Berkeley is one of the most important pillar in this giant building. So if I'm able to crack this pillar, if I'm able to destroy this pillar, the body of idealism, even if it does not destroy, it is going to tilt. It is going to tilt because the foundation is very strongly laid by subjective idealism. So how does Moore try to demolish subjective idealism? By way of picking up the central statement. So when we say that Moore's method is analytical only means that he tries to analyze the statement, a central statement, by interpreting it into different meanings and showing that in each meaning this statement is meaningless. So this is what he has shown in the essays Percipi also. He says that if existence and perception are identical, then both the concepts can be exchanged. As a result, we can say existence is existence and perception is perception. But if we say this, then it becomes a tautology. And tautology does not give any new information. Even Berkeley won't accept that esse est percipi is a tautological proposition. So esse est percipi cannot be, the existence and perception cannot be identical. So this way, this meaning cannot be held. Secondly, if we say esse is part of percipi, that is some part, that one part of perception is existent while the rest is not existent. But Berkeley won't accept it even, because Berkeley says whatever we perceive, they are existent. Whatever we perceive are existent. So this meaning also does not hold. Thirdly, percipi is part of esse. Percipi is part of esse. So you can see it like this, that in the second statement we said esse and not esse. That is, some part of perception is existent, some part of it is not existent. Third one is like this: perception, not perceived. So some existence is being perceived, some is not being perceived. So this is not correct. Berkeley says that existence and perception go hand in hand. Right? And fourth would be that both are inseparable. The fourth interpretation could be that both are inseparable. But if they were inseparable, then it would have been a necessary relation, the negation of which would deny contradiction. Right? And for a necessary relation, we do not give any argument, but Berkeley has given multiple arguments to prove esse est percipi. So, in any way, we cannot hold that esse est percipi is a meaningful proposition. In all its aspect, the proposition turns out to be meaningless. Hence, subjective idealism as per Moore stands rejected. ठीक है, तो ये सब आर्ग्यूमेंट दिए उसने. उसके बाद हम उसको काउंटर भी कर सकते हैं दैट this is not a valid critique, because the subjective idealism is not just restricted to this part, it is only a linguistic interpretation of what the statement would mean. Further, other aspects of idealism have not been discussed, have not been addressed. So this does not refutes idealism as the essay of G. E. Moore claims to say, as it is named, the refutation of idealism. Then, in defense of common sense, after rejecting idealism, he defends common sense. He says that common sense belief is correct belief. This was the first time that a philosopher actually defended common sense, because earlier the philosophers were only negating and rejecting and condemning common sense. So he says that there are beliefs, the ordinary beliefs are correct. There is certain reason to it. He gave the argument. You know what are the arguments? Then UPSC often asks what is the critique of skepticism. So skeptics are those who deny the possibility of real existence of world. But Moore, through his different arguments, shows that our everyday experiences are fundamentally true. Are true. ठीक है. So ये सब उसने किया. But you know that the defense of common sense was not very proper, in the sense that there are many beliefs in the common sense which are superstitions, which are not very justified. Further, Moore himself did not give a proper philosophy of common sense as such, as the idealist gave. Idealist even gave the proper philosophy of idealism, but there was no such philosophy on the end of G.E. Moore. Okay? And Moore's method, etc., was criticized by Wittgenstein on certainty. He says that Moore is conflating what is certain and what can't be doubted. So he calls it hinge propositions that enable doubt but are not impervious to it. In conclusion, you can say that there is an importance, because this was the first time a philosopher came out in defense of common sense. Generally, philosophy is conceived as anti-common sense. Okay? So this way you can say. Then there is Russell's logical atomism. So logical atomism is the theory which holds that the reality is composed of simple discrete facts. The simple discrete facts which are independent of one another. These are the logical atoms. And these facts can be expressed through simple propositions. Simple statement, या फिर statement ना बोल के और ज़्यादा सही होगा proposition, because not every statement is a proposition. Some statements, proposition are always true or false. A statement can be either true, false, or it can have no meaning. For example, we can say, where are you going? So where are you going? There is no right and wrong answer to it. Okay? It is not a right or wrong statement. Whereas the rose is red, we can know that whether rose is red or not. So it is, propositions are either true or false. For example, analytic propositions, they are always true. Your synthetic propositions, they are contingent, depending on whether the fact is verified as to be true or not. Okay? So these are propositions. These propositions are in correspondence to the facts of the world. So he comes out with a kind of referential theory. So these facts can be expressed in simple proposition and understand the structure of language, which allows us to understand the structure of reality. So Russell is also trying to understand the reality. Like Plato, he also wants to know the reality. He's also grappling with the same question. But according to him, the knowledge of reality will not be found in that visionary metaphysics of Plato, nor it can be found in the descriptive metaphysics of Aristotle. Rather, it can be found through the analysis of language. The analysis of language, because according to him, language has correspondence with reality. So if you are able to analyze language properly and see whether there is correspondence between facts and language, then we can build a body of language which is logically perfect language, which is ideal language, and has correct correspondence to the reality. This is the aim of logical atomism. In logical construction, he shows that even the molecular proposition at the linguistic level are the logical construction of atomic propositions. So when we build an ideal language body, we have molecular propositions, which are made from atomic proposition and the logical connectives. The symbolic logic comes in here. Then at the physical, at the level of objects, objects are logical construction of sense data. So there is a linguistic aspect to it, and there is the metaphysical aspect to it. That objects are logical construction of sense data. Then he, in incomplete symbols, what he shows that there are complete symbols, complete symbol versus incomplete symbol debate. Complete symbols can be used in isolation. Complete symbols denote an existing thing or being. Complete symbols cannot be used in a set of sentence which do not contain that symbol. Whereas in incomplete symbol, it is the reverse of it. Incomplete symbol में कैसा है? That it can be it cannot be used in isolation. Complete symbol can be used in isolation. Incomplete symbol cannot be used in isolation. Complete symbol denotes, refers an existent thing or being. The incomplete symbol does not refer or denote any existent thing or being. Third, your incomplete symbol can be used in a set of sentence that actually do not contain that symbol. So this he has shown with the example of author of Waverley, the present king of France, and your incomplete symbol also are of three kinds: primitive phrases, definite descriptive phrases, your इससे पहले आएगा indefinite descriptive phrases, then definite descriptive phrases. Definite descriptive phrases like the author of Waverley. So we tend to believe that author of Waverley is Scott, that automatically it's Scott, but he shows that it is not Scott. Matlab, the author of Waverley is not a complete symbol. It is an incomplete symbol, which he presents in a 3 set of sentence, which will be there in your notes. Then critique is by your P.F. Strawson. Strawson criticize करता है. इनकी किताब का नाम है ऑन डिनोटिंग, इनका है ऑन रेफरिंग. सो रसल्स थ्योरी एक्चुअली ओवरलुक्स हाउ लैंग्वेज फंक्शंस इन एवरीडे डिस्कोर्स. ही इज ट्राइंग टू कंस्ट्रक्ट ए आइडियल लैंग्वेज, a reductionist approach, by adopting a reductionist approach which has nothing to do with the everyday use of reality, everyday use of language. And if you want to know the reality, then you have to find it with the everyday use of language and not with the ideal language. This was critiqued by P.F. Strawson. Strawson was an ordinary language philosopher. But Russell's philosophy has certain contribution, that especially the analytical method that he adopted, the rigorous analysis that he done, and showing that the world is not the totality of things but of the facts, which was actually accepted by early Wittgenstein as well. And also the relationship of language to the reality. Then early Wittgenstein, he came with the picture theory of meaning. Language picturizes the reality. This is the basic proposition that he is starting with the basic assumption that he is starting with. The language picturizes reality. But it is not like the real, the pictures, जैसे कि images हम create करते हैं, not like that. It picturizes reality by the way of a logical structure that it shares with the reality. है ना? Language shares the logical structure with the reality. If the logical structure is correct, then the description is correct. So this logical structure is only there with the facts of the world, where facts is there, where picturization is possible, correspondence, verification is possible. There we believe it. Cat is sitting on the mat, mirrors the arrangement of objects in reality representing a particular fact. Okay, so basic proposition तो वही है कि world is all, पहली ही proposition में बोलता है TLP1 में, world is all that is the case. World is all that is the case. But what is the world? World is not constituted of things but of facts. And these facts share a logical structure with a language, and through the study of the logical structure between language and the facts, we can know the reality, we can understand the reality. So there is picture theory of meaning. पिक्चराइजेशन के उसने रूल्स भी बताए हैं, विच माइट बी देयर इन योर नोट्स. Saying and showing, he said what can be said can only be there is a distinction between what can only be said and what can only be shown. The problem with philosophers is that they have started saying what only can be shown. They have started talking about ethics, metaphysics, but these are domains of showing and not of saying. Only factual propositions where picturization is possible, they can be said, because what can be said meaningfully, and what it means to say meaningfully is the picturization. Picturization is the criteria. Picturization is not possible in the case of logical form, ethical values, or metaphysics. So this limitation indicates that certain experience transcend our verbal expression. Very much like how Indian philosophers also say that the reality cannot be expressed verbally. Buddha used to maintain silence on metaphysical question. He also used to hold that whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be in silence. This is what early Wittgenstein says. But his critique was presented by later Wittgenstein. He says later, then don't look for meaning, see the use. Picturization is not a valid theory. Use is important. If you want to know the world, then you have to understand the language, how it is used. Because through the use theory, through the language games that are played in the world, you can understand what kind of reality is being there in the world. Through the use you will understand, not through the picturization. So, early Wittgenstein says, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be in silence. This is the domain of saying, and there is this domain of showing. Saying is possible only case of picturization. Showing is something which transcends verbal expression. This highlights the limitation of language. This also highlights a kind of mysticism in Wittgenstein. Then we have logical positivism, which were very much inspired by early Wittgenstein. Positivism says, you know that they hold, like for example, Schilling says, the meaning of a proposition lies in the method of its verification. AJR says that a meaningful proposition is either analytical or verifiable in experience. And in experience, it is direct verification, indirect verification, weak verification, strong verification, okay, that he accepts. And Carnap says that while checking for the meaningfulness, check for the syntactical structure. Because sometimes grammar is correct. A statement might have correct grammar, but not the logical structure. The syntax might be problematic. For example, a proposition like George V is square root of virtue. In this statement, the grammatical structure is correct, but the logical syntax is problematic because square root has a different logical power. So what happens is, even in metaphysics, the words of different logical powers are mixed together. The pseudo proposition that he says, Carnap says, for example, a proposition like real is rational and rational is real. This is a pseudo proposition because words of different logical powers have been mixed. I think, therefore I am. Thinking, an extension, different logical powers, they have been mixed. Problematic statement. Pseudo statement. Soul of Superman is good. Pseudo statement. Okay? तो तीनों का आप लिख दोगे व्यू. Then also they rejected metaphysics, but their rejection of metaphysics was not proper because their verification theory was biased. Passmore says that if you destroy metaphysics, then you also destroy physics. Quine also agrees to this. And even the destruction of metaphysics, so-called destruction, the rejection of metaphysics, the metaphysics still continues, but logical positivism has been rejected by the time. So time has rejected logical positivism but accepted metaphysics. This is seen in the works of Strawson, descriptive metaphysics. Heidegger is also building a metaphysics, right? Then linguistic theory of necessary proposition. Here they talk about the analytic synthetic part. They say that analytic is those which are true by definition. Which are true by definition, where the meaning, which have only meaning. And synthetic are those which are dependent on factual analysis, which are informative. ठीक है. बट इस चीज़ को बाद में जाके क्वाइन ने रिजेक्ट किया. क्वाइन सेज that there is no such distinction, sharp distinction between analytic and synthetic. The reason is there is no such proposition which is only meaning based or fact based. So analytic proposition as per logical positivist is totally meaning based. Synthetic proposition are those which are fact based. But Quine says there is no such proposition which is only meaning based or fact based. Every proposition has a meaning part and factual part. There is no proposition which has only meaning and no fact. Even the mathematical propositions are not such that they have only meaning and no fact. Although the meaning part is more, even the analytical proposition, the meaning part is more, but it does not mean there is no factual part. In the synthetic proposition, it is not case that there is only factual part and no meaning part. So this distinction is a dogma. The distinction between analytic and synthetic is a dogma which has been perpetuating in the philosophy since the time of even Hume used to believe that relation of ideas is a matter of fact. Then Kant, then Quine, this linguistic theory of necessary proposition. And so this was criticized by Quine. So you can say this and conclude. Later Wittgenstein talks about use theory. The aim is to show that language has no fixed meaning. Meaning depends on the use and social practices. So there are different language games being played in the world. The legal language game, the religious language game, okay, the political language game. So every language games is associated with its form of life. So the religious form of life is different and political or legal form of life is different, and that form of life actually gives the context and meaning to the language, and there is no fixed meaning as such. Language is a rule governed activity. Rules of one game cannot be applied to the another game. Rules of legal language game cannot be applied to study the meaning of religious language games. In this way, the metaphysics also has its form of life. So, the metaphysical statement holds true in that form of life. This way, he also criticizes private language because since language is a rule-governed activity and set up in a public context, so there cannot be such language which is only private, which is developed by a person. Language is inherently a social activity. We share thoughts and concepts, and by sharing of thoughts and concepts, we give meaning to certain things. For example, in legal terms, habeas corpus, mandamus have a meaning because certain thoughts and concepts are being conveyed through these words, and they have meaning only in that language game, not in the religious language game. You cannot use mandamus, habeas corpus, certiorari in the religious language game. Similarly, omnipotence, omniscience, immortality have no meaning in the legal language game. But this was criticized by Saul Kripke. Kripke said that interprets Wittgenstein as there is no fact of the matter about rule following, leading to kind of skepticism. So he says, but although it is very important. Then comes Husserl in phenomenology. So many people do not know that Husserl actually wrote a book named Philosophy of Arithmetic in his early times. In his early times, he wrote a book, Philosophy of Arithmetic. In Philosophy of Arithmetic, he was trying to derive the principles of mathematics through the psychological phenomena like comparing, contrasting, combining. This approach was criticized by a logician named Frege. Frege called this approach psychologism. Frege called this approach psychologism. And later, Husserl understood the limitations of his early views that were he was doing in philosophy of arithmetic. He understood that this approach leads to skepticism, relativism, which is not at all the goal of philosophy. The goal of philosophy is to find apodictic truths. Whereas psychologism entails a kind of relativism. So there are three kinds of truths: assertoric, problematic, and apodictic. Assertoric says what is the case, problematic says what may be the case, apodictic says what must be the case. So philosophy needs apodictic truths and not the assertoric and problematic, which are the domain of science or maybe your psychologism. Okay, so this he criticized himself in his new book, which is Logical Investigation. In Logical Investigation, he gave a thorough critique of psychologism and came up with a new philosophical method, which was a presuppositionless method. In psychologism, there are many presuppositions. In phenomenology, there is no presupposition. It begins with absolute poverty. Okay, and the aim is to discover the invariant essence of the phenomena. What kind of phenomena? How the object is presented to the consciousness. Because there is a property of consciousness which is called intentionality. Through intentionality, the consciousness knows. It is the aboutness of consciousness. So consciousness always knows about something. It is not never empty consciousness, whether in reality or in dream or in hallucination. So he talks about the noesis and noema, the content and the act of consciousness. So if both are present, then it is an intentional act. So even hallucination becomes an intentional act. Okay. So throughout his approach, he is trying to avoid the psychologism approach. He is doing reductions and coming up to the pure phenomena and the transcendental ego, to which the essence would appear. This approach was criticized by Heidegger. Heidegger says that because this entire inquiry of Husserl was based on epoche. Epoche is kind of a bracketing of the external world and situation. It is a kind of detachment. Epoche is a detachment, or can be compared with the samvar of Jainism. So this detachment was critiqued because Heidegger says that if we shift focus away from if we shift our focus to this abstract detachment away from the being in the world, how we are related to the world, the inquiry won't make any sense, because our existence only makes sense in the context of the things we are related with. So if we have to do the phenomenological inquiry, it has to be done with the being in the world and not being detached from the world. But however, you can conclude with these lines this way. Then we have existentialism एग्जिस्टेंशियलिज्म के अंदर सोरेन किरकेगार्ड, टू इंपॉर्टेंट बुक्स, फियर एंड ट्रेम्बलिंग, ईदर एंड और. Either and or. Okay. So in Fear and Trembling, he explores the story of Abraham and Isaac and shows how there is a tension between ethical duties and personal faith. Soren Kierkegaard is a person who does not believe in objective truths, universal truths. What he believes in the private truths, the subjective, the realized truth. He believes in realized truth. The truth as it is realized by the person who is in the religious life. Religious sphere. So Kierkegaard has talked about three kinds of spheres of life: aesthetic, ethical, and the religious. Aesthetic is where person does not show any commitment, is always running away from the responsibilities. So this is a kind of ad hoc life. Then when person commits himself, takes responsibility, then comes to the ethical life. In ethical life also, there is, although there is so much of responsibility, etc., but there is still hollowness on the internal part, because there is also, in ethical sphere, there is subjectivity. What it does not give absolute inner peace. So then the person moves to the religious sphere. In religious sphere, again, although there is no objective truth in religious sphere, but religious sphere is all about realization. And this realization does not happen through an organized religion, an organized way of practicing religiosity, but through the private relationship with God, the private relationship with the power, the supreme power. This happens in the story of Abraham and Isaac, when Abraham was commanded by the God to sacrifice his son. If we go by the normative ethics, so there was a question on normative and meta-ethics. So if we go by normative ethics, no theory of the ethics, whether virtue ethics or deontology, can give us an answer that Abraham should sacrifice his son, because no virtuous person would sacrifice his son. Deontology says, what you cannot do unto yourself, do not do unto others also. But Abraham is a deeply religious person. He is a realized person, so he follows the command of God. Abraham is a single individual, and there is a problem of single individual, that single individual is not understood by the crowd. Crowd thinks as if the single individual is a mad person. Everybody is thinking that Abraham is mad because he is going to sacrifice his son, even on the command of a person that he has never seen, the God. Although the crowd thinks he has never seen, but Abraham has realized God by himself. So he is going out. Then there is absurd happens. Absurd is for the crowd. Absurd is for the crowd. That's why Kierkegaard says that the single individual is higher than the crowd. The subjective truth is higher than the universal truth. Universal truth is so-called truth which is believed by the crowd. Crowd thinks that this is the universal truth, but the single individual knows the subjective truth, and this is the truth which actually satisfies, pacifies and gives him peace and contentment. ठीक है, तो किर्केगार्ड की फिलॉसफी का तो ये पूरा फोकस था. Although he was an existentialist, he knew that at every sphere we have a choice, whether to be in the religious sphere or ethical sphere or the aesthetic sphere. But the aim of pure existence, the real existence, the authentic existence, is to bring contentment and realization in a person. This is possible only in the religious sphere, as per Kierkegaard. Then comes Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre says that man is condemned to be free. Your existence precedes essence, in the way that we are always defining our essence. It is never defined. We do not have any predefined essence, unlike the material objects. Material objects like a knife, a home, or anything for that matter have a predefined essence. Means they have fixed purpose. For human being, there is no fixed purpose. So it talks about three kind of beings: the being in itself, being for itself, and being for others. Being in itself is complete. It has its essence prior to the existence. For being in itself, the existence is prior to the essence. For being for others, being for others is like a state of human existence where the person is made object by others, where the person does not realize their innate freedom, does not take up responsibilities, gets into bad faith. So being for itself is a kind of bad faith where person denies their responsibilities, their innate freedom, and there is a kind of self-deception that person engages in. So from this bad faith, we have to go to the authentic existence. This will come only by taking up the realizing the sheer freedom that we have, and also the responsibility that comes up with that freedom. Okay, and once you realize it, you become authentic. And Sartre also says that most of the time we deny freedom because we want to run away from the anguish, anxiety and despair that comes up with owning freedom. तो जो भी व्यक्ति जो है वो जो फ्रीडम को मानता है कि आई एम फ्री, then they also have to accept the consequent anxiety, anguish and despair that comes up with this. So we have a tendency to give up this freedom, and we talk about destiny, we talk about some transcendental entity, God, niyati and all of that, because we want to avoid the responsibility as far as possible, the anxiety, anguish and despair that comes up with realization of absolute freedom also. ठीक है, तो सात्र इस तरीके से बोलता है. Then comes Heidegger. Heidegger says that for authentic life you have to understand the human existence, which is he calls the Dasein. So Heidegger has a complaint with the earlier philosophers, that earlier philosophers have forgetfulness of being. They forget the being. He talks about two kind of being and beings. Beings is plurality, being is unity. So Heidegger is interested in this kind of being. But to understand this being, that is the unity of our existence, we have to go and understand this plurality, Dasein. Okay, the being in the world. Being in the world की existence हमको समझनी पड़ेगी, उसकी प्रॉब्लम समझनी पड़ेगी, and we have to show that the features of existence, humans existence, and what is the way out. So way out, he says, way out is the same, that you have to realize the authentic life. The inauthenticity creeps in when there is denial of responsibilities, depersonalization, disappearance of personality from the crowd. In the crowd, there is a dehumanization of person, because we start taking interest in the plurality rather than unity of our existence. So this authenticity would come when you realize your, as per Heidegger, your limitedness, your death. So he calls that the being towards death is the being who would realize his finitude, and by confronting that finitude and projecting your life on that death, you will achieve your authenticity. There will be call of conscience, there will be moral upliftment, responsibility would come in, person will start taking interest in being, existence, unity rather than plurality, and this way you will attain your authentic existence. The work is Being in Time, which is the magnum opus of Heidegger. There are a number of things that we have mentioned here. You can read. Quine, we come. So Quine's work is two dogmas of empiricism. The first dogma is that of analytic and synthetic distinction. We have already mentioned that the classically empiricists used to believe that there is a fundamental cleavage between what is a analytic distinction and what is a synthetic proposition. Analytic proposition, they used to believe that which have only meaning part to it, which are true by definition. The empiricists used to also believe that synthetic propositions are those which have only the factual part, which are verified in experience. Quine shows that this is absurd, this is dogmatic, because every proposition has a meaning and factual part to it. There is no proposition in the world which is only fact based or only meaning based. The proportion might be different, but there is always two elements. For example, the so-called analytic proposition might have domination of meaning part, but it also has some factual part. Similarly, for the synthetic proposition, there is dominance of factual part, but it is not devoid of the meaning part. Further, he says, how will you define analyticity? If someone tells you how will you define analyticity, they would try to define it in terms of synonymity, cognitive synonymity. But how do you define synonymity? Then again, analyticity. So this is a kind of circularity which creeps in. So there is no way that we can make a fundamental distinction between analytic and synthetic proposition. This distinction is a dogma which is being perpetuated in the history of empiricism. So Quine is trying to destroy that dogma. Second dogma is that of reductionism. So reductionism, if you see the method of Russell, he is doing a reductionism, trying to reduce and study the things in isolation. The logical atomism is doing reductionism. Your logical positivism are also doing reduction by their verification theory of meaning. This verification of theory of meaning is a reductionism, because according to Quine, knowledge is a web of belief. Knowledge is a system, and you cannot isolate a proposition or a statement from that system and verify it in isolation. Verification is not possible in isolation because knowledge is an interconnected whole. There is a belief system of interconnectedness which constitute knowledge, and reductionist approach of empiricist is again a dogma. They believe that through reductionism we will get better knowledge of reality, but rather, as per Quine, you will go away from the reality, because reality is the knowledge is actually a web of belief, and if you have to understand reality, you have to understand that web of belief, entire belief system. So this way it is there. But Strawson argues and criticizes Quine. He says that Quine does not make distinction between a logical impossibility and a factual impossibility. Analytical statement signify logical impossibility. For example, he uses example of my 3-year-old is an adult and my 3-year-old understand the philosophy of Bertrand Russell. So 3-year-old is an adult is a logical impossibility, but 3-year-old understand the philosophy of Russell is a factual impossibility. But there is a factual possibility still there. Factually it is impossible, but it is not logically impossible. So this way Strawson criticizes. Then we come to Strawson, which is the final philosopher. Book name Individual. First of all, makes difference between visionary and descriptive metaphysics. Visionary metaphysics belongs to Plato, because Plato was trying to revise our understanding of the existing world. Descriptive metaphysics is the approach which actually studies the constituting entities, the entities which exists, and tries to define our reality according to it. So Strawson is subscribing to the descriptive metaphysics, as he believes Aristotle used to do. In his descriptive metaphysics model, he is trying to find out the basic entities. The basic entities which would explain the world. In Plato, the basic entity was, in revisionary metaphysics, revisionary or visionary metaphysics, the basic entity was form or idea. Whereas in descriptive metaphysics of Strawson, the basic entities are the basic particulars. Basic particulars. Okay? So he says that if you study the world, you will find that there are two basic particulars, physical object and person. दो काइंड ऑफ क्वालिटीज हम दुनिया में ऑब्जर्व करते हैं, टू काइंड ऑफ क्वालिटीज, दी साइकिकल क्वालिटीज एंड दी मटीरियल क्वालिटीज. सो एंटिटीज भी क्यों मान रहे हैं हम? बिकॉज दीज एंटिटीज आर दोज विच आर ग्राउंड ऑफ दोज क्वालिटीज. देर आर मटीरियल क्वालिटीज, what he calls the P predicate, and this is your M predicate, and psychical qualities, that is your P predicate. So दो ही तरह की क्वालिटीज हमको दिखती है, या तो एक्सटेंशन वाली क्वालिटीज या फिर कॉन्शियसनेस वाली क्वालिटीज. फॉर एग्जांपल हैप्पीनेस और टॉल है कोई चीज़, so we can say that this table has certain dimension, let's say 6 by 6, so this is a material quality. But in case of person, we say the Ram is tall, 6 feet tall, and Ram is very happy today. So happiness is a P predicate, and tallness, 6 feet tall, is M predicate. So there is a primitive concept of person to which both M predicate and P predicate can be ascribed. This is a primitive concept because if it is not primitive, तो फिर जो इससे भी छोटा होगा फिर वो primitive हो जाएगा. Right? So we have to accept that the qualities that we witness in the world, the P predicates and M predicate, there is some entity to which they are ascribed, and this entity is a person to which both M predicate and P predicate are prescribed. M predicate तो physical objects को भी होते हैं, but P predicate नहीं होते. We never say that table is happy. We never say table is happy or table is sad, because the P predicate does not belong to the physical object. But then there has to be some ground of this this P predicate also. P predicates cannot hang in the air. हवा में तो नहीं लटक सकते. So we say that there is a primitive concept, the basic concept of person to which they are ascribed. So physical object and your person constitute the basic particular, which are the basic entities in the descriptive metaphysics model of your Strawson. And these are spatio-temporal. Spatio-temporal means they can be located, identified, re-identified in space and time. ठीक है, स्पेस और टाइम में ये आइडेंटिफाई हो सकते हैं. So that's why UPSC asked the question, what is the role of spatio-temporal thinking in objective thinking in Strawson's philosophy? So objective thinking is these entities have objective existence, they are located in space and time, and this is consistent with the 21st century descriptive metaphysical model. So this way we have given the crux of Moore to Strawson. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any question, feel free to ask. All the best to all of you.